imagine looking at a brain scan glowing on a monitor.
Right.
When a normal person looks at a photo of someone crying, their empathy centers just light up. It's like the biological signature of human connection.
Exactly, yeah.
But when you put someone who has just gained like immense unchecked authority into that scanner, those regions just go dark.
Completely dark.
So today we are not talking about the psychology of bad bosses or, the moral failings of corrupt politicians. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to explore the physical, structural brain damage caused by power.
Yeah, and it really forces a complete reevaluation of how we view leadership, honestly.
I mean, it fundamentally changes how you look at history, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Because we naturally default to analyzing power structures through sociology or political science. We just assume that when leaders become detached or cruel, it's a conscious ideological choice.
Right, like they're just being selfish.
Exactly. But when you examine the neurochemistry, you realize that hierarchy physically alters the human organ.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring that biological reality. And to do that, we're drawing from a really fascinating stack of documents.
It's a great collection.
Yeah, primarily this dossier titled Ep13, The Neuroscience of Power. But we're also doing something a little unconventional today to help you picture this.
I love this part.
We're using the sci-fi and fantasy novel San Vitae, The Awakening, as our primary case study to see how these microscopic chemical changes manifest at scale.
Which I know using a fictional universe might seem counterintuitive when we're discussing hard neuroscience.
Yeah, it sounds a bit weird at first.
But it actually provides a perfect controlled environment. Fiction allows us to isolate these biological mechanisms and, take them to their absolute extremes.
Right.
It acts as a magnifying glass for the physiological changes we see in real-world leadership.
And the foundational thesis bridging both the science and the fiction today comes from a specific line in the dossier. Let me just read it. Power doesn't just change behavior. It changes the brain itself.
That is the core of it all.
But to understand that transformation, we really need to look at the catalyst first. Let's look at the initial neurochemical spark that happens the exact moment someone gains authority.
Right, and that catalyst is dopamine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't function the way we typically talk about it in pop science.
Like getting a notification on your phone.
Yeah, exactly. We usually hear about dopamine in the context of eating sugar or scrolling through social media like a quick burst of pleasure.
Right.
But dopamine is fundamentally the brain's currency for motivation and reward-seeking behavior. So when a person gains power, the brain experiences this massive, sustained flood of dopamine activity.
Wow.
It chemically signals that dominance is the ultimate survival advantage.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to look at the actual mechanism here. Yeah. So gaining power is functionally similar to taking a hit of a highly addictive drug.
Functionally, yes. Very similar.
So if the brain is suddenly flooded with all this dopamine, just from, giving orders or controlling resources, how does the physical architecture of the brain even handle that surplus?
Well, it treats it like a chemical assault.
Really? An assault?
Yeah. The human brain is totally obsessed with homeostasis. It always wants to return to a baseline balance. So when dopamine constantly floods the system from the exercise of power, the brain tries to protect itself from overstimulation.
Oh, I see.
To dampen the noise, it literally downregulates. It deletes its own dopamine receptors.
Wait, hold on. So to feel a baseline level of satisfaction or competence, a leader now needs like twice as much power or dominance just to get the same chemical signal.
Precisely. The baseline has shifted, and this is the exact neurobiological mechanism of addiction.
That is terrifying.
It is. The individual builds a tolerance to their own authority. A minor managerial decision, it no longer triggers the reward network. To achieve that same neurological state, they require escalating levels of control.
So they're literally chasing a high when they make aggressive decisions.
Exactly. Power ceases to be a tool for organizing a community or running a business. It becomes a strict biological dependency. The brain demands increasingly aggressive or high-stakes actions to force the remaining receptors to fire.
That completely reframes the entire concept of the dictator, or, even just a tyrannical corporate executive.
Right. We tend to view their continuous power grabs as strategic.
Yeah, but you are describing a person who is biologically trapped.
Yeah.
Which brings us perfectly to the ruling class in San Vitae, the Sanitary.
Yes, the Sanitary.
In the novel, they enforce these brutal, oppressive rituals on the underclass. And honestly, it reads like standard fantasy villainy at first glance.
Right. But what's fascinating here is when you view the Santori through the lens of receptor downregulation, their society makes terrifying sense. The author uses them to illustrate end-stage dopamine addiction.
Because they're immortal. Right.
Yes. The Santories have held absolute power for centuries. Their brains are so starved for a dopamine response, so desensitized to normal human interaction, that they have to engineer increasingly violent and absolute demonstrations of dominance just to feel a pulse in their reward circuitry.
Wow, so it's not just politics for them.
Not at all. Their governance is not driven by a political ideology. It is driven by an insatiable neurochemical withdrawal.
I know what you listening might be thinking, because I'm thinking it too. This sounds like a very convenient excuse for billionaires, monarchs, and politicians to act terribly.
Oh, absolutely. It does sound like that.
Like, oh, my dopamine made me do it. My receptors are downregulated, so I just had to lay off 10,000 workers. I mean, how do we separate this biological trajectory from actual personal accountability?
Well, that is the central tension of the research. Recognizing a biological mechanism doesn't absolve the behavior, but it does explain why the behavior is so incredibly predictable across different cultures, different eras, and completely different political systems.
Right. It's universal.
Yeah, because the brain is an adaptive machine. If you put it in an environment where dominance is the primary currency, it will brutally optimize for that environment.
And if the brain is aggressively optimizing for dominance, it has to be making trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it takes an immense amount of cognitive energy to maintain that level of heightened reward seeking.
Oh, massive amounts of energy.
So what is the brain physically shutting down to compensate?
It shuts down the systems that cost too much metabolic energy, and empathy is incredibly expensive. Which brings us to the empathy erosion effect. To understand this, we have to look at the mirror neuron system.
Okay, let's break down how that system actually functions, because when we talk about empathy, it sounds like an emotional or, a moral concept. But it's a mechanical process in the brain, isn't it?
It is entirely mechanical. Think of mirror neurons as a biological simulator.
Okay.
When you see someone accidentally hit their thumb with a hammer, you might physically flinch. Your brain is running a low-resolution simulation of their pain so that you understand their state and know how to react.
Right. It's how we connect.
Yeah, it is the evolutionary glue that allows human beings to cooperate and survive as a species.
But the brain scans from the dossier show that when high-status individuals are placed in an MRI, that biological simulator is effectively unplugged.
Completely suppressed. The regions of the brain that simulate the feelings of others show dramatically reduced activation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Wait, so when a CEO or a ruler ignores the suffering of the people beneath them, they aren't just being selfish or, too busy.
No, their brains are physically blinding them to it. And it goes beyond just the mirror neurons. The entire stress response system is altered.
How so?
Well, in a normal dynamic, if you cause someone distress, your amygdala, which processes emotional resonance and fear, lights up, and your cortisol levels spike. You feel stress because you recognize you have harmed the social fabric.
But the powerful individual does not experience that cortisol spike.
No, their cortisol reactivity plummets. They literally do not feel the stress of the situation.
That is insane.
The brain is optimizing for decisiveness and efficiency. In a position of immense power, if you are constantly running biological simulations of the anxieties and pains of thousands of subordinates or citizens, you would be paralyzed.
You wouldn't be able to make a single decision.
Exactly. The brain perceives empathy as an inefficient distraction to the task of ruling, so it prunes those neural pathways. It is a functional structural blindness.
I struggle to accept that it's purely a passive biological adaptation, though. I mean, isn't it just that climbing a political or corporate ladder inherently requires being ruthless?
It's a fair question.
You are telling me it is not just a self-selecting personality type, but actual acquired brain damage.
The research suggests it is both, but the biological adaptation is undeniable even in people who didn't seek out power.
Really? How do they know that?
There are studies where ordinary individuals are randomly assigned to temporary positions of authority in a laboratory setting, and they show immediate shifts in their mirror neuron activation.
Just from a lab experiment?
Yes. Within minutes of being told they're the manager of a fake task, their ability to accurately read facial expressions drops. Their brain immediately begins reallocating resources away from the empathy simulator.
Oh. It is deeply unsettling to realize how fragile our human connection really is.
It really is.
And this functional blindness is the exact phenomenon the protagonist in San Vitae, Curian, observes in the Santry. The author uses the fantasy trope of immortality to explore what happens when this empathy erosion is stretched out over hundreds of years.
Yeah, immortality in San Vitae is not portrayed as a gift at all. It is a neurological nightmare.
Right.
Because the Santry live for centuries without ever experiencing the vulnerabilities of normal human existence. Illness, poverty, powerlessness. Their mirror neurons have atrophied completely.
They just wither away.
Exactly. They cannot simulate the human experience because they have entirely removed themselves from it.
There is a moment in the dossier's notes on the book that highlights this perfectly with a quote from Curian. He is watching the elites from a distance, and he says, "What a curse it must be to be ageless, youth eternal, but no humanity with which to enjoy it."
It perfectly distills the science.
Yeah.
If your brain's empathy simulator is permanently disconnected, you cease to be human in any meaningful relational sense.
So just a machine at that point.
You become an island of isolated processing power, entirely cut off from the emotional reality of the species.
So if their empathy is chemically shut off and their dopamine receptors are demanding more and more control, how do they look in the mirror?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because the human brain abhors a logical vacuum, right? It can't easily sustain the belief, I am a monster. How does the biology prevent a leader from realizing they are acting like a tyrant?
This is where the physical brain changes give birth to severe cognitive distortions. The brain has an internal PR department, basically, and its job is to create a narrative that justifies the biological shifts. The dossier breaks this down into 3 major psychological mechanisms, and the first is disinhibition.
Which means the removal of the social brakes, essentially.
Exactly. Because their cortisol response is blunted, the powerful genuinely do not feel the ambient social anxiety that keeps most of us polite.
They just don't feel awkward.
Right. Without that chemical break, they physically feel fewer constraints. The data shows they interrupt more in conversations, they consume more shared resources without asking, and they apologize significantly less.
I mean, I think everyone listening can immediately picture someone in their own life who fits this description.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone who got a tiny bit of authority, maybe a promotion to middle management, or they became the head of a local committee, and within a month, they stopped apologizing when they were late and started talking over people.
We've all seen it.
We dismiss it as them letting it go to their head, but we are actually watching a localized biological disinhibition. Does this mean authoritarianism isn't just a political failing, but a predictable neurological trajectory?
We absolutely are watching biology at work. And that leads to the second, much more dangerous cognitive distortion, moral licensing.
Okay, what is that?
Well, when the brain needs to justify why it is suddenly ignoring the needs of others and prioritizing its own dominance, it rewrites its own moral framework. The subconscious logic is fascinating. It goes, I possess high status. High status is rewarded to those who are capable and good. Therefore, whatever actions I take must be inherently good, even if they appear harmful to others.
Wow. So they construct a reality where their cruelty is framed as a heavy burden they're carrying for the greater good.
Yes, because they lack the mirror neurons to feel the damage they cause, the greater good always aligns perfectly with their own continued dominance.
It's so dark.
It is, and this creates the final distortion, which is entitlement and tunnel vision. It is a rigid, cognitive inability to perceive any truth outside of their personal perspective. They stop questioning their own assumptions because their brain is no longer simulating the existence of alternative viewpoints.
And none of this is a modern discovery either.
Not at all.
Brain scans are just giving us high-definition photos of a phenomenon human beings have been warning each other about for millennia. The dossier draws a really fascinating parallel between these modern neurological findings and ancient spiritual traditions.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the language used by our ancestors was theological or philosophical, but their observations were entirely grounded in this biological reality.
Yeah.
When Christian texts warn of pride as the deadliest sin, or Buddhist teachings warn of ego as the root of suffering, they are describing the isolation and cognitive distortion of a brain that has elevated itself above the collective.
The dossier specifically highlights various indigenous traditions that require chiefs and leaders to actively serve the community, like they have to distribute food or mediate disputes from a place of humility.
Yes, and it was not just a nice cultural tradition, it was an intentional mechanism to counteract the brain brain damage of power.
They were forcing their leaders to continuously engage their mirror neurons.
Exactly, so the empathy simulator would not atrophy. They understood that power isolates the individual from the reality of the group. If you place a human brain on a pedestal, it will rot.
It needs to stay connected.
You have to keep it grounded in the physical and emotional vulnerabilities of the community to keep those neural pathways of empathy alive.
So, having established the power acts as an empathy-destroying, dopamine-depleting force that physically rewires the brain's architecture.
Right.
Wait, I mean, having established all of that, we have to face the ultimate question of this deep dive.
Yeah, the big one.
So what does this all mean? Is this unavoidable? Can anyone, anywhere actually be trusted with unchecked authority?
Well, the dossier outlines the three primary arguments that have dominated human history regarding this exact question. Argument one is the character defense.
Okay.
This posits that power simply reveals who a person truly is. The belief is that a highly virtuous moral person will resist the biological shifts, that their pre-existing character will act as a shield against the neurochemical flood.
This is the philosophy behind almost every modern election or corporate board search, honestly. The belief that if we can just find the right CEO or elect the right politician, the system will function perfectly.
Yes. But then argument two takes the opposing view, suggesting that power corrupts everyone universally. Lord Acton's famous phrase, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely," is the banner for this camp.
Right.
It argues that the neurobiology is too overwhelming, and eventually the dopamine dependency and empathy erosion will claim anyone, regardless of their initial moral standing.
But the dossier introduces argument three, which moves past individual morality entirely.
Exactly. Argument three frames power purely as a structural biological problem. It argues that relying on individual human virtue is a scientific absurdity over a long enough timeline.
Because of the brain's adaptability.
Right. The human brain is an organ. It will always adapt to its chemical environment. Suggesting that a good person can hold unchecked power without changing is like suggesting a good person can sit in a radioactive room without their cells mutating.
Wow, that is a visceral image.
The environment dictates the biology. Therefore, the only way to prevent tyranny is to refuse to build the radioactive room in the first place. We must rely on systems of distributed, decentralized power that prevent any single human brain from ever marinating in that level of isolation and dominance.
And this structural realization is the pivotal climax of the narrative in San Vitae.
It is.
As Curian, the protagonist, fights to overthrow the immortal Sanitary Council, he uncovers the biological machinery of their tyranny. And he faces this terrifying existential crisis.
Because he realizes that his revolution is inherently flawed if it only changes the personnel. If he overthrows the Sanitary and takes their place on the throne, his own brain will undergo the exact same physiological decay.
Give him enough time and the empathy erosion will hollow him out too.
Precisely. He has to fight the neurological nature of power itself, not just the people currently wielding it.
And honestly, it is the tragedy of almost every major historical revolution. The oppressed overthrow the oppressors, but they leave the concentrated power structures intact. They just put a new brain into the machine.
Yep.
And within a generation, the neurobiology kicks in and the revolutionaries become the new tyrants. The biological hardware running the people at the top remains identical.
And this is a crucial lens through which to view our real-world systems. It demands complete impartiality from us. When we look at global leaders, whether they lean left, right, or center, their political affiliation offers zero protection against these neurochemical laws.
Because biology doesn't care about politics.
The mirror neuron system does not care about a leader's voting record. If they are placed in a system of concentrated, unquestioned authority, their brain will adapt to it.
So we have dissected a massive amount of science and theory today. When we step back and distill the core takeaway from the dossier, the real-world research, and the fictional case studies San Vitae, what is the singular defining truth you want to leave the listener with?
It comes back to a specific synthesis of the research. Quote, "When power rewires the brain, hierarchy becomes self-perpetuating."
Self-perpetuating.
Yes. We have to stop treating bad leadership as merely a failure of character. Power is a neurochemical event. Understanding this biological reality is the foundation for questioning the hierarchies we accept in our daily lives, from the federal government down to the management structure at your local office.
We have to demand better systems.
We must demand systems that distribute authority and force collaboration, because concentrated power is quite literally a biological hazard.
It is a hazard that we voluntarily expose our leaders to every single day. Which leaves me with a final thought for you to carry with you after this deep dive is over. We have established that absolute power causes predictable, measurable, physical changes to the brain. Specifically, a profound loss of empathy and severe cognitive distortions.
Right.
If an airline pilot or a surgeon suffered a brain injury that destroyed their ability to process reality and empathize with human life, we would immediately revoke their license to operate.
We wouldn't even think twice about it.
So should society require mandatory, ongoing neurological and psychological evaluations for anyone holding high public office or possessing extreme corporate wealth?
It is a profound question. We test for cognitive decline, but we do not test for acquired neurological tyranny.
If we possess the technology to see the empathy centers going dark on a brain scan, are we actively letting people with acquired brain trauma steer the ship of human civilization?
It's a terrifying thought.
Think about that the next time you watch a leader make a decision that seems completely devoid of humanity. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the systems you live under, and the next time you look at someone with unchecked authority, try to picture that glowing brain scan. Look for the dark spots.